This year's draft might be one of the most important ones ever for the Chicago White Sox, since this historically bad season will not yield them a top 9 pick next year. The Sox got a chance to see some of the draft prospects at the MLB Combine that could potentially help turn things around. Let's discuss how it went with my guest, James Fox of FutureSox, next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown, part of the Fansided Network. You can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Also, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Tax Network USA. Did you know that it's never too late to resolve your tax issues with the IRS? Don't wait. Reduce your tax debt and get help from a team of licensed tax professionals. Call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. Since the new MLB lottery rules will prevent the Sox from picking in the top 9 next year, even though the team is on pace to finish with the worst record in the league, the Sox must make sure they get a stud player with the number 5 pick in this year's draft, along with the other picks that they have in the first couple of rounds. And to make sure you are prepped for such an important draft, I got James Fox from FutureSox to talk about how the MLB Draft Combine went. Then, since he is the managing editor of one of the best resources for White Sox prospects, we will talk about when some of these current prospects and potential picks can help establish a timeline for when the Sox will actually be good again, since the GM has no clue. And then finally, we'll circle back to some draft talk to discuss a character that I don't think gets enough blame, and maybe James can help me say that's not correct, or maybe you will agree with me, for the franchise to king so quickly. So, James, first, what skills are measured at the MLB Combine?
Just like a lot of like throwing skills. Like they take the miles per hour, they do take exit velo data, things like that. Like the high schoolers do play a game. Like a lot of the top college guys don't even work out. So one of the big things is like seeing high school players like in person, like next to the college guys, right? And kind of getting a feel of what they look like. And then everybody subjects themselves to like a medical that's super important. And then the team interviews are like the big part of it. You know, it's very traditional, like NFL combine in regards to like the interview process. So the team, you know, talks to basically everybody. You know, they come in and they see, and Mike Shirley was there with his staff. I don't know specifically which Sox staff members were in attendance, but I do know that Chris Getz did not go. That's not uncommon. A lot of GMs don't go. Like some GMs love this stuff and just like kind of go. Some just kind of trust their staff. Chris Getz has a lot to do right now. You know, I don't know how much he's actively scouting. I'm sure he's on the phone all day. You know, but they're kind of, the White Sox are working on 2 fronts right now, right? You have a really important trade deadline and a really important draft. So I will say that, you know, there were a couple of guys there that are realistic possibilities for their pick. So JJ Weatherholt, shortstop from West Virginia. He was hurt for much of the year with like some reoccurring hamstring injuries. So he was the favorite to go number 1 overall in the preseason to Cleveland, and he still could. But he could also be on the board at 5. That's a potential option for the White Sox on the college side. And then the prep guy that they've been linked to the most is 18-year-old Mississippi, like shortstop / center fielder Connor Griffin. He did some workouts and was at the combine too. I'm sure they met with him. So I would say of those, you know, those are the 2 names that were the most prevalent. And then I just like to throw out there, like there are 2 local guys too. Ryan Sloan is a right-handed pitcher from York High School in the area. So he could go like in the top 15, or he could go in the 30s and get paid basically top 20 money, but he's going to go really high. He's one of the best prep pitchers in the class. And then Lincoln Way East over by me, their shortstop Tyler Bell will probably go in the 2nd or 3rd round at some point. I don't know how much interest the White Sox have in Tyler Bell. He's a Kentucky commit, but he could get taken early too. So I just like to kind of mention some of those local guys.
Well, and also you said on the last time I had you on there, that's important because Nick Shirley likes local guys and he likes Midwest guys, right?
Yeah, so I do think there's a chance that they take multiple Midwest guys. I just don't know that they're necessarily taking Illinois high school guys. There was just Scott Merkin just published a piece with an interview with JJ Lally, who's the White Sox area scout for this area. He drafted George Wolkow and Noah Schultz, two pretty good picks. And, in there he highlights some of his like misses too, right? But, Noah Schultz, second best pitching prospect in baseball right now. So, yeah. So just, there is some local talent. But yeah, I mean, this scouting director, Mike Shirley's an Indiana guy. So even when you go through and you start looking at these picks, it's like, oh, this guy pitched at this college, but he grew up in Wisconsin or Indiana. So, they have long histories on most of these guys that they end up taking.
Why does the MLB Combine go on during the College World Series? And is this a huge missed opportunity for MLB to do something like what the NFL has done in terms of making it like an event?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Like, I think there's just like not enough time. I mean, the draft is at a terrible time anyway. Like, I've always kind of thought that the best spot for it was in June. I kind of liked it during the College World Series when they used to do it there, guys who get drafted. And I guess there were reasons not to. Like, Rob Manfred wants his All-Star Week thing, right? Where it's like cool and more people watch it, but it's really tough on guys in the league. It makes the trade deadline less compelling because there's no early trades. It also really hurts scouts. Like, scouts are out right now scouting 2025 players because it's like the start of the summer circuit for juniors that are going to be seniors next year. So it's just really weird that it's this late. It also kind of affects like guys that you take. There are some teams like the Cleveland Guardians, they basically shut down their entire draft class last year and didn't like have any of those guys play in the minors like until this year. So some teams are doing that. Like if you take a college pitcher that's already thrown like 90 innings or something, you're just not going to get much more out of that guy. So yeah, I hate the late draft. I don't know the perfect time to do the combine, but it is helpful. It's helped clubs a lot, like mostly for that medical component and then the team interviews.
Oh yeah. I mean, remember back in the day, it used to be like some of these guys got picked because the scout would see him one time in high school and it was like, oh, that's the guy. And I think that's a great way of them now getting back into, the modern way of evaluating players, get the interviews. Hockey does that, for example, and hockey is in the same type of level, at least in terms of you're dealing with prospects at the high school level, you're dealing with prospects at the college level. So it's a great way to get those interviews, get to know those people and that type of thing. Speaking of the College World Series, who impressed that could be on the White Sox radar if you got a chance to see the College World Series?
Yeah, I mean, any number of like Tennessee hitters that could go in the second round theoretically. They have a first baseman that's interesting. So their second baseman, Christian Moore, he's probably going to go too high. He's going to go top 20. So any number of hitters from there. I mean, Braden Montgomery of Texas A&M is a top 10 pick, but he broke his ankle like in the regional. So he wasn't really playing for Texas A&M. A&M has multiple players for next year's draft, but not for this one. I guess I would say like the most impressive was Jack Haglione, probably of Florida. So he's a left-handed pitcher and like the best power hitter in the class.
But a first baseman, right?
First base, yeah. So I think Cags is like a realistic option for the Sox at 5. It's my least favorite option just because I don't want them pigeonholing themselves into taking a first baseman at 5. We talk about it on our show pretty much every week. We interviewed Carlos Collazo this week for an episode that drops Thursday. He kind of said similar. I mean, Cags has huge power, right? And if the Sox took him, I would cheer like crazy for him to be awesome. But the problem with taking first baseman is like they have to mash, otherwise they have no utility at all, right? So if you end up like where you're not as good with the bat, it's not like you can move to another position. You're playing first and you're underachieving offensively. It's like a blown pick. I mean, Andrew Vaughn, Spencer Torkelson, all these guys. And maybe that's not fair to Cags because it's a different profile. He's 6'5", 250, like hitting from the left side, right? But it's about the utility at first base. Like if you're picking at 5, you should be able to grab an up the middle player.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have talked about it. That's why I love having you on the show. We kind of think similar. The only way that I think you should ever deviate from first base is obviously, do they fit that like unique profile like Frank Thomas, for example, a genetic freak almost in a way, or do they come from like a bloodline like Prince Fielder, for example? I remember seeing him. Those are the only two first basemen that I've been like, yes, those are guys you got to take. Otherwise, let's go up the middle, that type of stuff. General Manager Chris Getz is not willing to put a time frame on when the next competitive team will be here. James and I will talk about maybe how this draft and some of the current prospects development can help give you a better idea of when the Sox will eventually be better next on Locked On White Sox. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. Level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And LinkedIn is more than just a place to look for your next dream job, showcasing your skills, or networking to make that career move. LinkedIn can also help you with to close deals and improve your sales. That's right. LinkedIn can assist with LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a sales intelligence platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performance. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform, Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with people that matter. Well, how will LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you filter through 1 billion people? Sales Navigator helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals such as job changes or which accounts you should prioritize, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are most likely to convert. And right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. Let LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and get started. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And the White Sox complete a 3-game set against the Los Angeles Dodgers tonight. First pitch is at 7:10 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter, and thank you for making the show your first listen. Lots of great White Sox podcasts out there like Future Sox. And James, what is the schedule again for all the Future Sox podcasts? It's normally you got one on, I think, Tuesday, Monday. Just let us know.
Yeah, so we're a little off this week just because we didn't record live. But yeah, generally me and Ian host just the standard Future Sox podcast Sunday nights at 8. We live stream it. So then that's available in the feed Monday morning. On Tuesdays, we host the Roundup with Elijah Evans and Jeff, AAA Jeff, who covers like our affiliates in Charlotte and Kannapolis and Winston-Salem occasionally. Jeff Cohen, he does a great job for that. They have guests occasionally. And then we have a big league centered podcast too, as well, with Nick Morawski, who, Locked On fans know well, and Danny Miller. And then we've been doing some extra like guest centric pods as well. This week we have Carlos Collazo of Baseball America. Next week, Joe Doyle from Future Star Series is joining us to talk draft. And then we're going to have a Guardians guest. That's a buddy of mine the week before the draft as well. So yeah, usually 3 pods a week.
All right, that's awesome. Again, make sure you guys are checking out Future Sox. It's one of the best resources for White Sox prospects information. And also then make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel for me at Locked On White Sox. What about you, James? What do you got? You got that YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's just at Future Sox.
All right, make sure you guys are subscribing. Turn on your notifications for both shows. And again, James Fox, managing editor. I got your title right. Managing editor of Future Sox and host. So Chris Getz won't put a timeline on the next competitive team in part because he probably needs to get through the draft and the trade deadline.
Yeah.
And
Would you? Yeah. No.
yeah, I wouldn't either, because now that's going to hold me accountable for when I would be saying I delivered. But then again, wasn't he the guy that was supposed to turn things around quickly? But James, is there a difference maker in this draft that the Sox could draft that is capable of coming in and say a year or two that the Sox are targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could draft a college player that's on the same timeline as some of your other guys that could be here. Like, if you think you can be good in 2026, there's multiple guys that could be on that team. I mean, we just talked about how, like, Kaggs wouldn't be a favorite of mine, but I mean, he could be your first baseman in 2026, no problem. JJ Weatherholt could be your second baseman or your shortstop if he were taken there. I mean, if they took one of the pitchers, I don't think they're taking a pitcher. I've really, like, heard that they're focused on position players and they might take some pitchers later. Either of those two pitchers at the top could come really quickly. You know, if it is like the Connor Griffin plan, I would be fine with that. But then you're talking about a high school guy that's further away, right? I think we're going to know a lot more just with the deadline in general, right? Like if they trade Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet, I think we can argue that the system would probably be top 5, because for them to pull the trigger, they're going to get a ton, right? But you're also taking like a definite step back for next year, like where next year looks rough again. Now, you might be in a better position to actually win big in 26, 27, 28, 29, right? But I don't think anybody is really like looking forward to that right now. So I think the deadline will have a bigger impact on like how quickly they can contend more so than this draft can. But the draft is important. I mean, they have 4 of the first 80 picks. They pick at 5, at 43, at 68, at 78, and then their 4th rounder is at 107. So you could theoretically get 5 top 100 players like in your first 5 picks. It's just an infusion of talent into the system. Even if they don't trade Robert and Crochet, I mean, you're getting something pretty good for Eric Fetty. I think you'll get a decent piece for Pham, Kopech, etc. Stuff you probably talk about every day. So we'll have a better idea. July 31st or so, I think, where this is headed. But yeah, I mean, Chris Getz would be out of his mind right now if he committed to a timeline, especially with the uncertainty around the stadium and the television deal. I'm just not sure they really know right now, like how quickly they can get back in the mix.
Well, and also the potential labor issues too in 2026. I know that's been brought up on the White Sox Talk podcast with NBC Chicago. Ken Rosenthal said today on Foul Territory, I believe it was Foul Territory, or actually, no, it said yesterday on Foul Territory that the White Sox have to blow it up to get back to being competitive quickly. 1, didn't the Sox already do that last trade deadline? And 2, wouldn't having, you kind of talked about it on the last question, but wouldn't having Luis Robert Jr. and an extended Garrett Crochet help build a competitive team sooner?
Well, so I think that's the big question, right? It's if you can sign Garrett Crochet, you should. If you can't, then you're going to probably take offers at this deadline, but I think you might get more this winter, just when somebody kind of knows more of what he is. I mean, he's not risky, right? I just don't know that anybody's going to pay the price of 4 like premium prospects for him, knowing that you might have to like shut him down or throw him out of your bullpen. I do still get him for the next 2 years, right? And I think one of these teams could think that he's like the Shohei Ohtani whisperer after seeing like the success that he's had against Ohtani, right? I'm just not convinced that they're going to get enough. I mean, there's a lot of Padres rumors out there. The Padres have a couple of super young international type guys that would be very interesting in deals, but they're like talking about how they don't want to trade position players. I mean, the White Sox need position players back in these deals, So I will say people closer to the team kind of don't think Robert and Crochet are going to get moved. Not because the Sox wouldn't, like Chris Getz would trade anything. They just like don't really believe that they're going to get like what they would require. Whereas like a lot of your national type guys like John Heyman, Ken Rosenthal, I think it's like these are 2 of the best names out there. Of course they're going to trade him. So I don't really know. Like I think it's going to be really interesting for fans because I think they'll be involved in rumors like right up until the end, to the point where it could be like, oh, they're getting close to like getting moved and then nothing happens, right? Like we've been there before. But I do think that's something, I guess, that we have to look forward to in the month of July.
Yeah, and I agree with you on at least especially with Crochet. Like also we're just still getting data points at what type of because I've already certified him as an ace. I think he's there,
Yeah, he's
but
a
is
stud.
is he going to be like a perennial top 5 voting getting Cy Young ace? Like that's the type of thing that he's still checking off on the data points. And if I'm a GM, I'm thinking, okay, I need help right now, and I know he's going to be a top of the rotation guy, but is he a stud number 2 maybe or that? So you're right on that end. And the only exception that I would make for like trading Crochet or Robert Jr. is it's either got to be to the Orioles because they can develop hitting and they got plenty to spare. The Brewers the same way, and the Dodgers. But if it's anybody else, I'm kind of like, nah. Although I think you pointed out the Phillies.
Yeah, for me, like I like the Phillies and Mariners as potential options for Robert just because of the sheer amount of position players that those teams have. And the good thing about Philly is that Dave Dombrowski is not afraid to trade prospects. Like if he thinks he can win a title, like he'll trade prospects. Like he doesn't really care. So whereas like a lot of these guys, like you mentioned Baltimore, like Mike Elias is kind of afraid to trade prospects. He never trades anybody. So that's like one potential issue there. But I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Like Ken Rosenthal's article this morning said the White Sox have high-level decision makers. One of those guys who I think we're going to talk about to end the show here, that are out like watching the Mariners, the Padres, and the Dodgers, among other teams, right? So, you know, some of that's normal coverage, like that's what pro scouts do, right? But it's also like, hey, we have a couple of super high-impact players. What are we going to need, basically?
All right. Finally, before we wrap up this segment, the Sox do not have a lot of elite hitting prospects, but does Colson Montgomery, Edgar Cuero, Brian Ramos, Jacob Gonzalez, and let's say a salvaged Oscar Colas have enough upside along with the money that they'd have to spend this offseason to get the team back to being competitive by, say, 2026?
Maybe by 26, but you're going to have to spend money. I think the pitching infrastructure is solid. Like you're going to have Noah Schultz in that rotation. You have Drew Thorpe, you have Jonathan Cannon, you have a whole host of other guys, right? But you're going to have to spend money on offense somewhere. And if a couple of your guys hit, like there's a lot of scouts that really think Edgar Cuero is going to be good. That would be huge for the White Sox. If you have a switch hitting catcher, that's pretty good. And then Colson Montgomery figures it out. I mean, that's 2 pieces right there. You need a lot more than that. And how much can you compete with just starting pitching and no offense? So I think 2025 is probably going to be rough, but I think depending on how some of that young pitching goes, you should theoretically be able to spend money for 2026 to get back in the mix.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk about a guy that I think deserves some blame, but doesn't get enough. So we'll be back with James next on Locked On White Sox. Here on Locked On White Sox, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team. Whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs, it's year-round. And you know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax USA Network go to bat for you. See, I used to work in banking collections, and trust me, the IRS has the tools to follow through on what it can do to recover the money it thinks you owe them. You know, banks may say one thing, but they might not be able to do it. Guess what? The IRS can. So don't mess around and don't go it alone. Use Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000, 1-800-549-1000, or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. See the link in this episode description below. And if more or less is more your style or strength when it comes to making selections, a wise man once said, stick to the strengths that stick to your strengths. Then let me tell you about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. And all you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Excuse me on that. PrizePicks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. My good buddy from college and on my text chains who lives behind the cheddar curtain always tells me that the availability in 30 states is what he loves about PrizePicks. He also travels a lot for work, but he can still get his selections in when he plays with PrizePicks. And I love it for how easy and fun it is to use. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And the White Sox complete a 3-game set against the Los Angeles Dodgers tonight. First pitch is at 7:10 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I have James Fox from FutureSox on with me. We talked about the MLB Draft Combine, talking about maybe can the future, that they have down in the farm and potentially will draft can help them in their competitive timeline. And now I want to talk about a guy who just does not get enough blame. And we're going to talk about another guy that you might think in a second. But Sox fans love to point the finger at Jerry Reinsdorf, Kenny Williams, Rick Hahn, and Tony La Russa for the White Sox downfall. One guy who might not get enough blame is former amateur scouting director Nick Hostetler. James, how bad was his tenure at running the drafts?
Yeah, so the drafts weren't very good. But I think a lot of it is more so like an org decision than Nick Hostetler. Now, I will say, like, Nick Hostetler was very good to us at FutureSox. Like he would talk to us multiple times a year. He was super informative. Whatever we needed, he would help us out with stuff. I would talk to Nick Hostetler on the phone, and he would talk about his love of prep players. And then they'd take 38 college guys in a draft, right? And I do think some of that is like, some of it is Jerry Reinsdorf, and some of it is whoever in that front office, Rick Hahn, Ken Williams, like wanting to get closer to the majors, college guys to like kind of fit their timeline, right? So looking back, like his first draft, Zach Collins went 10th overall. That was like an accurate spot for that player. That player just like wasn't good enough. Like they were wrong. They took Zach Birdie in the same draft. It's like a reliever with a first round pick. It's like a terrible decision. Now I think they were still trying to contend at that point. So they like kind of were going to rush him to the big leagues, right? Jake Berger, where he went, was actually like, okay. He just got hurt twice. Gavin Sheets was a second round pick. That's like still on your team. Andrew Vaughn was a no brainer. It didn't work. I wanted a high school player that year. But I had just kind of heard like, you're going to pay a guy $7 million at number 3 overall. The owner doesn't want a high school player that's going to cost him $7 million that you have to wait 4 years for. And then Nick Madrigal, I think, is the pick that basically got Nick into the role that he's in now. So Nick is on the pro scouting side for the White Sox now, doing a different job. Mike Shirley was, I think, the assistant director under Nick Hostetler. So he was in, he was in the scouting department too. I think it's tough to blame like scouting directors directly for bad drafts just because, they have like whole staffs full of people. And the White Sox have a long history of like people meddling in the draft room and like making picks, right? Like the rumor on like there's like Keenan Walker, who they took years ago with like a supplemental pick. Like the rumor was that Ken Williams had seen him like one weekend in Arizona in a tournament where he went like 13 of 17, like in a weekend. And then they took him and he was terrible. There's just like stuff like that all the time. The scouts would do their jobs. And then Jeremy Haber's computer would tell him to take this college guy that had these numbers, So yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I think Nick would be the first one to tell you that like the drafts weren't good enough. They drafted a lot of guys that made it to the big leagues, but not much impact talent. And it really, really hurt because you needed impact talent like at that time for like this last rebuild, whatever we want to call it, to work. And it just like wasn't good enough, especially when you're picking like 4 times in the top 10, basically.
All right. That's why I wanted to have you on, because I know I've been hammering them, and that now that I got more context, okay, I'm not going to hammer them anymore on that, because you're right. I mean, and the other thing is all you can do is take them, and then it's up to Chris Getz, for example, to develop them. And that did not happen a lot. So that makes sense. So should we be concerned that the Sox still have Tony La Russa involved in the organization? And will he medal then in the draft?
So a lot of people seem to be very concerned about this. And look, I think I was on last time and I said the two biggest issues the White Sox had like in the last 5 years or whatever were not signing Bryce Harper and hiring Tony La Russa. Like Tony La Russa managing the team is a terrible decision. If he was like your president of baseball operations or something, it would be a terrible decision. I really don't think it matters that much. I feel like if Tony was doing this, but he never came back to manage, I feel like nobody would care. I think like this is what old baseball dudes do. They just like latch on with a team with like some of their friends and they go hang out at the minor league affiliates and they look at players. Like I don't mind Tony La Russa looking at players and offering advice as long as he doesn't have like authority and veto power. Now he told Daryl Van Schouwen that he doesn't. We'll see, right? I'm sure his voice matters to Jerry Reinsdorf, but unlike the Kenny Williams, Rick Hahn paradigm, we were told Chris Getz is in charge. I think if they do dumb things, like we can blame Chris Getz for it. If that ultimately ends up being something that like it was Tony La Russa's decision. I mean, look, I think it's just something that Chris Getz is going to have to wear. So no, I don't think having Tony around is that big of a deal. I do think he's going to influence the next manager choice, but I like Skip Schumacher, and I think that's who the manager is going to be. So I'm okay with that. Like something we joked about on our show. Would you rather have an ex-Tony Cardinal guy or an ex-Royal? So I think I'll go with Schumacher on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind if like, and I even said it on yesterday's show. If you ask Tony to go and watch a kid, hey, how's that bat? How's the ball coming off his bat, or how's that ball popping? I think those are the little things that sometimes maybe the analytics overlooks, like how's it hitting? I got no problem. Let's get some of those old school guys. There's nothing wrong with that little fine tooth comb if you're trying to split hairs, but you're right. Like the thing that Bernstein and Holmes though pointed out was he sort of did say, well, the buck stops here, but it doesn't, in that quote. But, I understand, like, I'd rather have Skip Schumacher. I'm with you on that one. So I totally agree on that. And then one final question, and every dayer wanted to know, what is wrong with Grant Taylor?
So he has a lat strain. So it's very typical, like coming back from Tommy John. It's just a pain, basically. So the club is not like concerned because it's not super serious, but it's something that takes a while, which is why he's on the 60-day DL. So he's in Arizona working his way back. Hopefully he pitches again this year. We saw how dominant he was. I mean, he was like one of their better pitching prospects. A lot of people were asking me like why he wasn't in Winston-Salem or Birmingham right away. And it's, this is why, right? You ramp guys up and things like this happen. So I don't think there's a long-term concern. The only concern is just the lack of innings that he's going to have this year, kind of delaying him going forward. But he's a premium dude. Like we're seeing it with Noah Schultz right now. I mean, Noah Schultz only threw 27 innings last year. This year, he'll have close to 100. If Taylor can do that, he'll be right on track like next year.
Yeah, I would actually like to see them put Taylor on the same developmental plan as Noah Schultz. I think there's nothing wrong with 4 innings every Saturday. It's every Saturday he's pitching?
Yeah, and if you make 25 starts, like I'm not a math major, but it's 100. So, you know, it's 100 innings.
I would like to see them establish that, and then I would like to see them doing what they're doing right now. You promote them from AA. Let's see what they do. And if they fail, send them down to AAA to do some work or use AAA as the parking lot.
Right.
Well, this wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. And thanks for joining me, James. Before I go, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Sox wrapping up their 3-game series with the Dodgers. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at Locked On White Sox or follow or subscribe to the show and wherever you get your podcasts. And James, again, where can they get all the great Future Sox content?
Yeah, so FutureSox.com will take you there, and then we're at FutureSox on Twitter. Ian is the guy that posts all those highlights. So, you know, you can follow him at Daily White Sox, and then myself at James Fox 917. All of our contributors, you could pretty easily find like on the site as well.
And you guys are being so gracious and so cool. So once we get closer to the draft, I'm going to try to do a draft preview. I think I got you guys all lined up. I really appreciate it. You guys are keeping me informed, and I cannot, prop your guys' stuff enough. And hopefully, people keep going over to your stuff too when they listen to my show here. Also, feel free to leave comments about today's topics regarding the frustration or regarding the MLB Combine. When will the Sox get back to being competitive? And well, I guess we're not going to blame Nick Hostetler anymore. Thank you for clearing that up, James. You can leave them on the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub, or at Locked On Sox, or email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Again, thank you, James, for joining us. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.